guys, this is our second set of notes. So go ahead and have your social studies brain book or journal. Last time we took notes, we talked about the colonies, and that would be Europeans coming over to this country to find work and money and land, and they had been told about all this, free land that was here, but there was a problem. There was already a group of people here, and we call those folks Native Americans. And they were tribes of people that were already here on this land. And so today we're going to be talking about cooperation, how the natives and Europeans worked together and cooperated. And we're also going to talk about conflict, some of the problems that were caused from these two groups coming together. So at the top of my paper, I'm going to write native. I'm going to abbreviate American and Europeans. On our Padlet, you've seen some videos. Also on page 8 and page 9 of your social studies workbook are more information about cooperation and conflict. And these are notes from those 2 pages. So I'm going to show you, I've already done them once, so you can kind of see I'm going to have 2 columns, one for cooperation and one for conflict. All right, so I'm going to write cooperation. I'm going to put a smiley face because that means, yay, we're working together. And on this side, I'm going to write conflict. And I'm going to put a growly face because that means that we are not getting along. And I'm going to divide my paper all the way down in half. Zoom out so you can see that a little better. Okay. And here we go. I'm going to start on the side with cooperation. And some ways that, the Europeans and Native Americans coming together is that they worked and traded together. Okay. The Native Americans. Well, over here in America, because there was still a lot of wilderness, there were lots of animals to hunt. So the Native Americans had furs. And back in Europe, people loved to make clothing and different things out of fur. So the Native Americans gave, that's why I drew the arrow, gave the Europeans furs. The Europeans, meaning they're from Europe, they brought metal. The Native Americans did not have metal working at the time. So they brought metal, things like tools and weapons. And some interesting things like mirrors. The natives had never used a mirror before the Europeans came. And sugar was also traded. Another thing that the 2 groups traded was knowledge. When the Europeans got here, they didn't know how to grow in the American soil. So the Native Americans, abbreviating that NAM, taught them how to grow maize, which is like a type of corn, beans. I know some of you might like baked beans. And squash. those were known as the three sisters to the Cherokee: maize, beans, and squash. And the Europeans taught them how to make their arrows that they had previously hunted with stronger by using metal. So and if you need to pause so that you can get all of that down, I know I might write a little faster. You may pause now before we go on to conflict. All right, conflict. Conflict that we see is land ownership. The Native Americans did not believe that land was owned by anybody, that it was supposed to be shared, that it was a gift that everyone just shared. So the Native Americans did not believe land was owned, comma, but shared. Well, this was very different than how Europeans believed. Europeans believed that you owned the land, that where you lived was yours. And they started to put up fences because they didn't want the Native Americans on their land. And that, of course, caused a lot of trouble because they had very different beliefs, and hunting grounds that were previously the Native Americans. Europeans started to chop down trees and put up buildings and put up fences where the Native Americans had previously lived. So Europeans built fences to keep natives off their land. I mean, how would you feel if someone started to build a fence in your backyard to keep you out of it? That'd be weird. Another thing that the two groups did very differently and believed very differently was in hunting. The Native Americans only killed what they needed in order to survive, and they used all of the animal parts for their food, their clothing, their shelter. They didn't waste any of the parts of the animal. Whereas the Europeans maybe killed the animal but didn't use all of the parts. They were a little more wasteful. They also hunted for sport. When they came over to the Americas, there were animals they had never seen before, and they thought it was, kind of fun to go out and hunt. And so this created a problem because as more and more people kept coming and hunting, what happened is there wasn't enough animals. They were starting to overhunt. They were starting to cause a word called scarcity, meaning that there's not enough. So it becomes a problem for the Native Americans to find food and to find clothing and to find the animals that they had used for their shelter. So the note on that, I'm going to say Native Americans killed only what they needed, and did not waste any parts. Whereas the Europeans overhunted and caused scarcity, might be a new word to use, scarcity of animals, meaning there's not enough to go around. And then just in general, population. At first, the Native Americans were very helpful and were okay with sharing their land with the Europeans. A lot of them were very welcoming. But then more and more and more people came, and that became a problem because if there are more people living in an area, there are fewer resources. You know, if everyone chops down trees for their houses, there are fewer trees. If everyone's hunting rabbit and deer for food, there's fewer rabbit and deer to go around. If everyone is building next to the waterways, there are fewer places to access the water that you need. So as more Europeans came, Native Americans were pushed off their land. And it became harder to find food. Slash resources. Just like you probably wouldn't like someone moving into your bedroom and using all of your stuff. That's kind of what happened with the Native Americans. They were pushed off of their land and couldn't get what they needed. Something mentioned in the video that I've run out of space for, so I'm going to flip over. I'm going to write conflict. Was disease. Not only were they being pushed off their land, but many Native Americans died of sicknesses brought over by the Europeans because they had not been exposed to them before and didn't have the ability to fight off the illness. So disease was another big area of conflict. Many Native Americans died because of European diseases. Of course, rewind, pause, do what you need to do to get these notes down. On Friday, you'll be taking a quiz over the notes we took this week. So make sure you have really good notes because it's an open note quiz. And I hope you have learned a little bit about colonization and some of the problems that caused for Native Americans here in our country.